Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and we have a very special program with you on the eve of the 18th anniversary of the tragic events of September 11th. Joining me today is one of the founding members of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Richard Gage. How are you today, Richard?
I'm feeling great, Jason. Ready to rock and roll. I got a lot to share with you.
Yes, and I am excited to talk about that. For those unfamiliar, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth stemmed out of the discussion of what truly happened to World Trade Centers 1, 2, and especially 7. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to get Richard on today, as we have this new paper out of Fairbanks, Alaska, 126 pages that simply eviscerates, Richard, the official version, the official NIST version of thermal expansion, a thing that never happened before and hasn't happened since, to take down a building, a hypothetical event, to describe how that building went down symmetrically. So why don't you tell people first, give them a little introduction to Richard Gage, how you initially got involved, and then why these latest developments are so important.
Well, I got involved personally because I realized that I was lied to. I heard on the radio David Ray Griffin, 2006, in the San Francisco Bay Area on Bonnie Faulkner on KPFA Guns and Butter program. He was talking about all of this evidence. I mean, we're talking about a third tower. I didn't know a third tower came down. I'm an architect. This is the third worst structural failure in modern history. And here I am not knowing anything about it. Well, what? It came down by normal office fires, they were telling us, Jason. This is amazing. Office fires have never brought down a skyscraper before 9/11, ever. And these are much hotter, longer lasting and larger fires in several dozen skyscrapers that have never brought them down. And here we have a few small scattered fires in Building 7. I got real curious. So I launched Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, starting at the firm I worked for. All 14 of them agreed with me after coaxing them into a meeting with pizza. And they agreed with me, oh my God, these are controlled demolitions, because at first they thought I was nuts. Well, now we have 3,000 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. And I think Leroy Halsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country at the University of Alaska, who's been engaged in this study for like 4 years now. We've funded it, hundreds of our supporters, right? Just pulling their money to try to make some sense in the real world of engineering and architecture, if you can call that real. They have come up with enough money to engage Professor Halsey. Why? Because he says, hey, this building came down by fire, but that's never happened. So let's look at it, because we have so many high rises that have similarly been built. Are they subject to free fall acceleration straight down into their own footprint in under 7 seconds in the case of Building 7 by fire? This is as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. So that does not happen. It looks exactly like a controlled demolition, in fact, and these are the elements that intrigued Professor Halsey to look deeper.
So now that we have this paper, and they've proven beyond a reasonable doubt, let me just show one of the measurements here. They actually took out some of the beams here in order to get their calculations correct. In other words, there were no brace beams in the original models that NIST put forth to try to explain their theory. They were just absent. But when you put them into these models, it doesn't seem like this could absolutely occur.
There are several structural omissions on the part of NIST that are blatant and obvious and directly connected to trying to get them to support their own theory of collapse by fire, but they actually don't at all. They omitted the shear studs as well, tying this massive girder to the concrete floor slab above, which would have kept it from moving at all. So they eliminated them, even though they're shown in the shop drawings. They also eliminated the steel stiffeners, which support the flanges of the girder over the top of the bearing seat on this particular column 79, because NIST's whole theory states that this thermal expansion of these long span beams expanded them, breaking off shear studs that they had, that NIST acknowledged, but that they were broken, and pushing then this girder off of its seat sideways off of column 79, none of which could have happened according to the Alaska study. And then this failure causes floor 13 to fall on 12, 12 on 10, and so on for 9 floors, leaving column 79 unbraced. Well, they say that never could have happened either. But then NIST claims that there's this cascading collapse all the way up to the east penthouse, which does fail 6 seconds prior to the overall failure of the building. But if this would have happened, you would have seen massive exterior deformation in the perimeter structural steel system of Building 7, along with breaking of thousands of granite panels on the outside and windows too, none of which happens in the videos. So their computer model, which crumples up like a beer can and begins to tip over, so they stop it after just 2 seconds, doesn't look anything like the actual collapse video that we have. So Professor Halsey got real creative and said, gosh, can I take all of NIST's false assumptions and see if the building fails? Let's use their assumptions. They tried that. They couldn't get the building to fail whatsoever. In fact, the girder moved the opposite way, away from the center of the building, its point of greatest stiffness, and moves to the outside, pushing the outside wall out, which NIST had previously claimed, in their input data, they had made it infinitely stiff, which would have forced the floor to work backwards the other way, pushing the girder off of its seat, assuming all these other false assumptions. So Professor Halsey gets real curious. Gosh, we can't make the building fail. What do we have to do? He took out 8 of the columns around column 79. And what happens then? The building does begin to fail, but it begins to tip over. 8 columns missing in the northeast section is going to make the building fail to the northeast. It's like you're getting kicked out in your knee, right? But that's not what happens either in the actual collapse of the building. It comes straight down, just like the old hotels in Las Vegas. So he goes back to the drawing board, year 4, right, or 3.5. And he starts, this takes a lot of time. This is an incredibly detailed set of calculations with the SAP 2000 and Abacus programs that he's using. They're much more sophisticated, by the way, than the program that NIST used 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago now. So by God, Jason, he has to take out 650 columns virtually at once within a second and a half, and then the building falls exactly as we see in the video, and with an unrelated event failure up at the east penthouse. It's unrelated. It's not part of the overall collapse of this building. That's now proven scientifically. And so what can do that? Do you have any idea?
Gee, I just don't know. But if we're talking about global failure on all the major beams at once, you would think there would have to be some kind of a secondary device to cause that to happen and not deformation. And let's be honest, the videos are clear. The videos show the building going into its own footprint, no matter what angle you look at. Every single one of these models that I've seen with any hint of honesty shows them tipping over. Like you said, there were several computer models and simulations that are available with the draft of this report on your website. How can people see this report, check out these models, and then support you guys so that maybe, just maybe, somebody in the mainstream media other than Yahoo Finance might pick this story up?
Yeah, well, we're certainly hoping so. We've gotten lots of alternative media. Thank you very much for seeing how important the complete uh, denunciation of the single official report uh, of the government by NIST to support their failed fire collapse theory. The implications are incredible. If Building 7 did not come down according to fire, and we all knew this before the Halsey report, right? Those of us who look at the forensic evidence, the evidence of incendiaries, thermite, molten iron at the base of the towers, molten iron pouring out of the crab claw excavators that can't possibly be produced according to the official narrative, either in the Twin Towers or at Building 7, which wasn't even hit by a plane. The evidence of molten iron microspheres throughout the World Trade Center, dust, which are ubiquitous, 10 tons of this material designated by the EPA as a signature component of the World Trade Center dust, and yet they have no idea where they came from. Molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Professor Jones and others have documented very carefully that the ends of the beams have liquid molten iron slag on them, which is the evidence of thermite incendiaries. Even FEMA, in their Appendix C, a metallurgical examination of the steel from both the trade towers and Building 7, document a hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel with liquid molten iron, with sulfur invading the grain boundaries of the steel. Where does sulfur come from? Sulfur is used in thermite. It becomes thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. So we have official sources documenting forensic evidence of thermite incendiaries at the World Trade Center dust, completely ignored and thrown out of the final report by NIST.
You know, I wanted to ask you also about this New York City district firefighter investigation that's been on your website. What can you tell the audience about this? Because we're far from done fighting.
We are, and the firefighters are not done fighting either. 5 fire commissioners from a town in New York have voted unanimously to demand a real investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. This has never happened before. The firefighters have been the most injured, and they were elevated to hero status, right? And they should be. But this has kept them from talking out against the powers that be, who are telling lies about what happened to them in these towers. We lost 343 firefighters, and we're looking at Thomas Hetzel, one of them there. He was in the Franklin Square Munson Fire District, and he and another lost their life. These fire commissioners want justice for the heroes of 9/11, and to that end, they are going with us tomorrow to the National Press Club in a major historic press conference that is demanding a new investigation and justice for their fallen. And then we march over with them in uniform to meet with at least half a dozen directly congresspersons, and then 2 dozen appointments with their staffers, while the rest of our team will be fanning out, getting our petition, the Bobby McIlvaine Act, for a new investigation, legislation that has to be simply introduced by one congressperson or senator in either House, Senate, or House. And all 535 are going to get these materials. So it's a big day for us on Capitol Hill. We'll be filming it. And by the way, the conference, the press conference tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock on September 11th, will be live streamed on our website, ae911truth.org. We'll also be presenting the Halsey study at the same time. It's a double press conference.
So the National Press Club in D.C., I assume, and is anybody else going to be covering this? Is it going to be on C-SPAN 1 through 3? I can't imagine that they're going to try to black out several different firefighters simply asking for a legitimate investigation into what happened to their brothers in arms.
Yep. We have certainly distributed to all the mainstream outlets in Washington, D.C. and around the country this story, the fire commissioner story and the Alaska study story. So are they going to be there? Well, their typical behavior pattern in these events is to ignore it. And that we've heard a lot of crickets. And we're doing everything we can to coax them there and to force them to deal with reality, because the alternative mainstream, the alternative to the mainstream is media is becoming the mainstream because people don't trust the media anymore. They trust Jason Bermas. They trust other info warriors that show up and speak the truth and dare to have scientific forensic evidence, for instance, for the destruction of the towers on their show. So we're doing it by ourselves now, Jason. Congratulations for being key and one of the first among them.
Well, thank you for saying that. James Corbett just put together another outstanding piece on World Trade Center Building 7 in his Whistleblower series that features Barry Jennings, one of the two people that was stuck in Building 7 while both buildings collapsed, talked about secondary explosions, was there with the City Corporation Council, and yet nowhere were either of their names mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report, nor was Building 7 all but a footnote in that first initial official investigation. That alone should have been a crime, Mr. Gage.
Yeah, there's lots of crimes here. Cover-up is really key among them for our use because NIST has engaged in the largest cover-up of the crime of the century. CNN and all the mainstream channels along with them. And guess what? Our own elected representatives have been complicit. I mean, we've done this 5 years in a row, Jason. Gone to Congress, gone to every one of their offices, brought them materials, met with congressmen. Jim Himes, particularly from Canada, is a notable example. I sat down with him, showed him the scientific forensic evidence for nanothermite. He actually wrote NIST and said, "What about this? You got to do something about this. What did you find? Did you test for explosives?" They write back, "No, we didn't test for explosives." By the way, this is after claiming that they didn't find any evidence for explosives. Years later, they admit they never tested for explosives. I mean, what do you do with that? So we're just all over it and doing everything we can.
Yeah, you can't find them if you're not looking for them. So if you can't find, we found no evidence. We didn't look. We didn't actually test for anything. That is just so incredible, especially not only the scientific evidence, I mean, the dustification of these towers, the ejection of some of these steel beams literally hundreds of feet laterally, not vertically, folks, not falling down, but laterally being pushed out with force. A lot of people say,
at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, at an incredible rate. Well, we can argue one or two, but 7's pretty obvious. No, all three are extremely obvious when you look at the science of these buildings. Anybody who goes into it with a clear head without preconceived notions can see that. Richard, how do we continue to inform the masses that still are skeptical, that think that jet fuel can't melt steel beams is just a funny meme? How do we bring them into the fold to look at the actual evidence?
Great question. We've been working on this question for 12 years as we've had various forms of luck, mostly because the wall of denial is so thick and impenetrable, seemingly. But we have breakthroughs here and there with notable people now, the fire commissioners. I think what we do is we haul these cannonballs up to a high point and hurl them. The cannonballs of the fire commissioners. We're doing that in Congress tomorrow. The cannonball of the Alaska study. We've sent out 20,000 postcards to engineers and architects all around the country and asked them to look at the study and submit comments during the open review period, which occurs over the next 2 months. So this is what our main focus right now, but we we never stop doing interviews. For instance, we'll be on Coast to Coast AM radio September 11th, the evening, 10 p.m. Pacific time, talking to 2 million people. So I think I'm able to reach a lot of people with 3 or 4 interviews daily for the last 4 days and the next 2. So in addition to that, it's your listeners that really need to send the AE911truth.org link to every architect and engineer they can find, their elected representatives, the media, and citizens, their own family, friends, and colleagues. Send the Alaska study, which you can download on our website at AE911truth.org, and print it and take it to engineers. It's 128 pages. They'll like it. The engineers like this kind of thing. So get it to them. At least get the link to them. You can do a lot just from sitting on your own seat at your home.
Well, I agree with that. If you want to really be a keyboard warrior, instead of sitting there and concentrating on what the mainstream's talking about and getting into Twitter and Facebook battles over nothing, you should be mass emailing this study out to people. You should be making people aware that there's going to be a press conference tomorrow at the National Press Club on behalf of fire commissioners in New York that are questioning the events of 9/11. It is so important to this day. Our entire foreign and domestic policy, Richard, almost 18 years later, relies on their version of events. This is why we continue to be in the Middle East. This is why we are in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, and beyond. While we keep Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, and other black sites open and continue the track trace database surveillance society here. It is a large issue, and this is at the crux of it. How can people support you right now? Give them an email address, give them a website, give them a donation. Is there a Patreon, a Subscribe Star, other ways they can help?
Yep, absolutely. We're going all across the country, and it does take funds. And so, in fact, we have $50,000 left to pay for this Alaska study, and you can help out with whatever you can. Many people are giving small amounts, like $10 a month, joining the family of sustaining supporters. You can do that at AE911truth.org, or take on a bigger chunk of the Alaska study, $1,000. $10,000. That's what it's going to take, because until we pay for this study, we can't get Professor Halsey marching all around the country representing it. It's got to be paid for. So that's our current drive, and we hope you'll all help us with that.
Well, Richard, I want to thank you for your time. You've done great work. I know we haven't seen each other personally in years, but I'd like to change that. And we're definitely going to have you on this program coming up after 9/11 sometime to talk about the National Press Club, to talk about this study and how it's getting out there. I want to thank you again, good sir, and keep up the great work, man.
Thanks so much, Jason, and you too. Great job out there.
Thank you, my man. All right, folks, I appreciate all of you guys tuning in, and I want to remind you that, I'm doing this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a day. Yes, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a day, believe it or not. Check it out. I think this is video number 4 today. It might be number 3, but we've got Patrick Henningsen coming up after this at the top of the hour at 3 to discuss the Middle East. We already broke the news that John Bolton has been fired. And folks, we are going to continue on driving to the truth, because it's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. And 9/11 proves that beyond a reasonable doubt. Please go check out my documentary films, Loose Change Final Cut and Fabled Enemies, for free on my channel if you want to learn more about 9/11. And if you can, $5, $10, $15 really helps. I've got a GoFundMe. This is how we're doing it monthly. There's only about 8 or 9 days left in this, and I'm way behind, but that's okay. We'll make do with what we have. I want to thank everybody out there who has given, and thank everybody out there for any kind of support, whether it's just thumbing this video up, liking it, or subscribing and ringing that bell. That being said, I'll see you in about 30 minutes on the flip side.